Hey everyone, we've been taking a look at abstract expressionism, and I wanted to continue to examine the art in the aftermath of World War II and the new direction of what happens as abstract expressionism becomes more popular and gains more fame. I want to take a look at Robert Rauschenberg, which is kind of an anomaly for art historians, and it's really hard to put him in either early pop art or maybe early minimalism. And we'll take a look at both of those two art movements for the last two sections of this semester. And so I wanted to just think about him as kind of a precursor to both of them. He seeks to remove artistic influence from his art, like John Cage. His works are void of his psyche. Art has no absolute meaning, so Rauschenberg doesn't impose one main thought or idea. And so to him is very similar to Dadaism, not trying to impose an idea or thought in reaction to abstract expressionism, which is all about the inner psyche, the inner ideas of the artist. Very similar to Surrealism, is all about the ideas, insights, the dreams of the artist. They're trying to remove the artist from the work of art, suggesting that maybe artists have too much influence, too much say in a particular work of art, right? He emulates randomness of nature by removing the devices of its construction. As much as possible, he tries to remove himself from his art, if that is even possible. Art is not reality, it's a construction of reality. That's something that we've talked about a couple of times this semester, particularly with Surrealism, questioning the idea of what is real. Hence, an artist must remove himself or herself as much as possible to create reality or capital T truth in art, right? So how do we represent the truth of the world around us? Well, if we're just depicting the exterior world, that's not truth. What is truth? Because it's created, right? It's created by a person. The way to create truth, because the world is not necessarily, the events, the life is not necessarily guided and directed by, by you, the artist. It just exists apart from the artist. And so you have to think about, how do I reflect that kind of randomness of the world around us? Whereas abstract expressionists try to use art as a means to discover themselves, Rauschenberg doesn't encourage the viewer to look deeper. Art is merely a reflection of life. Its spontaneity captures the essence and confusion and chaos of postmodern life. Art, like life, just happens. His assemblages or combines are another and other common technique of Rauschenberg, and these are found images or junk that he reconfines to create nature. Here's his, I'll just kind of go through these quickly. This is automobile tire print, where he has his friend and composer John Cage take a Model T Ford that has been, the tires have been inked, and then drive over a scroll. And so the idea is, is this art? What is art? Beginning or getting back to that conversation of Dadaism and starting the question of what is art? Who is art? Who is an artist? What makes art an art? Because he didn't drive over the painting, his friend did. So does that make this art? Does that not make it art? Does that make him an artist? He's starting that idea of the question, but what he's trying to do is he's trying to remove himself from the art to get closer to truth, right? Truth, it just exists apart from the artist, and so trying to construct it, it then no longer becomes truth, it becomes a construction of art, right? He says, painting relates to both art and life. Neither can be made. Try to act in the gap between the two, between art and life, and trying to bring them closer together. Here's his white paintings. The idea is to remove the creator from art. So rather than, focusing on the color of Jackson Pollock or Barnett Newman or Mark Rothko, thinking about the ideas or the images of like a Picasso or a Dali, he just has white canvases. And so then the question is, what does he mean, right? These are just blank canvases. And then that leads to a bunch of questions of, well, he's just trying to be a con artist. He's just trying to trick people. But again, he's getting us to think about what makes something a work of art. What makes something an artist, right? He's defying our expectations. We expect that art to have meaning. It has significance. It's supposed to lead us towards an ideal. It's supposed to have this utopian kind of image, as avant-garde is. Art does. And he suggests maybe it doesn't. Maybe art just is art. And maybe we need to stop putting labels and ascribing so much meaning to it. This one is quite controversial. This one is, he goes to Willem de Kooning, who is an abstract expressionist, one of the leading abstract expressionists of his day, and he asks for a work of art that he can then erase. And then he spends a month erasing it. And Willem de Kooning, who was kind of, as I said, the reigning master, didn't really feel threatened by Rauschenberg. Rauschenberg at the time was just this kind of young artist that he was kind of the next generation. So he's just like, yeah, whatever. And so he gave him one of the works of art that he was working on. He took it off the easel and gave it to Rauschenberg. And then Rauschenberg took it home, erased it, and then made a new work of art. This is erasing the artist from the work. Right? The idea of trying to remove artists, because if an artist has, the brushstroke or the touching or the color, the choice of colors, we all start to think about, well, what's that mean? What's the greatest significance? What's the message of that? And he suggests maybe we need to pull back a little bit from that and just not put so much meaning and influence on art. We should just have art exist. Here's a quick documentary where it talks about Rauschenberg and this particular moment when he went to Willem de Kooning's apartment.
Willem de Kooning was the most successful and inspirational of the abstract expressionist circle. Many young artists of the period were in awe of his mastery of painting and drawing.
Everybody was working like de Kooning. And I already wasn't painting like them. In fact, they didn't take my work seriously, which made me even friendlier as far as they were concerned, because I in no way could be considered a competitor. So I was no threat.
You rated the Kooning? Now, what does he mean by what is that? Do you know?
Well, I love to draw. And as ridiculous as this may seem, I was trying to figure out a way to bring drawing into the all whites. I kept making drawings myself and erasing them. And that just looked like an erased Rauschenberg. Or, it was nothing. And so I figured out that it had to begin as art. So I thought it's got to be a de Kooning then, if it's going to be an important piece. You see how ridiculously you have to think in order to make this work? And so I bought a bottle of Jack Daniels and went up and knocked on his door and praying the whole time that he wouldn't be home, and then that would be the work. But he was home. And after a few awkward moments, I told him what I had in mind. And he said that he understood me, but that he wasn't for it. And I was hoping then he would refuse, and that would be the work.
I'm shocked. I would expect the Kooning to turn on his ugly side.
He couldn't have made me more uncomfortable. He took the painting that he was working on off the easel. I don't even know if he was doing this consciously. And he went over and put it against the already closed door. But I was noticing things like that. And he said, okay, I want it to be something I'll miss. I said, please, doesn't have to be that good. I didn't say that, but that's the way I'm feeling. I kept my mouth shut. And I want to give you something really difficult to erase. Thank God. And he gave me something that had charcoal, oil paint, pencil, crayon. And I spent a month erasing that little drawing this big. And on the other side is one that isn't erased. The documentation is built in.
I think it was psychological in the sense of what was there for him to do, but challenge the reigning master. Even though he loved de Kooning and thought, he was the greatest living artist. And then, of course, it created this immense scandal. How could you erase this masterpiece? And not only did you presumably take something out of the history of art, but you also defaced property.
They think it was a gesture protest against abstract expressionism. Because, see, it's a very complicated story. And I don't think most people would think this way. And so it is hard for them to think of that. Or just a pure act of destruction. Vandalism is the other alternative.
And for you?
It's poetry.
And again, I mean, we might take a look at this and say that it's, there's nothing there. Anyone can do that. Anyone can erase that. But for modern artists, it's about the ideas. It's about the conversation. It's about what makes this, right? So the idea that people were upset and they thought that this was vandalism or taking something out of art history, that's part of it. What makes something art, right? Again, this is stemming from the questions that Duchamp posed with the fountain. What makes something art or not art, right? And that it begins that question. This is part of what links Rauschenberg to minimalism. I want to take a look at what links him to pop art. What he also does with his combines or assemblages is he takes art from various places around the world and just images that we're constantly surrounded by images on TV and in films, and they influence us subconsciously without really realizing it. And so he just takes these random objects and places them together without commentary. In a very similar way to what we would think of as synthetic cubism with Picasso. But he's doing this with images. And so because he's taking images from popular like newspapers or popular images from art or popular, from comic books or whatever, people associate that with the beginnings of pop art, right? But again, he's just throwing random images out there and then he's leaving it up to us to make sense of. He's not providing commentary. He's making us think about the connections and what connects them. But getting us to think about the world around us and how the images might influence us, whether we're aware of it or not, right? With the random images that come together. Well, these are another assemblage where he's taking things like a parachute or a sock and then putting them on the canvas. Again, maybe, we might see this and it looks like junk, but he's suggesting that we're surrounded by, just random objects all of the time. And we don't really think about it. And so again, what he's trying to get us to do is like we're walking through the city street and all of a sudden we see stuff. And that's our reality, right? They're just there. And he's just putting it out there to get us to interact with our real life experiences rather than thinking about something having to be polished or beautiful or perfect that we would see during the Renaissance or Baroque era. He's getting us to think about just the life that surrounds us and whether that's enough, right? And here's another one where he uses mixed media, wood, a mirror, a stuffed eagle, a pillow, cardboard box, just kind of piecing it all together to give us a new experience. Take a look at a couple other early pop artists, Klaus Oldenburg, and then we'll take a look at Jasper Johns. Like Rauschenberg, who sought to remove de Kooning from his work, Oldenburg seeks to remove himself from his works through removing his subconscious, his ideas, his thoughts, his biases. To him, he examines the literalness of art. He wanted to blur an artistic image with the object being represented to make them visually indistinguishable between what's being represented and the actual object. And so again, we're getting closer to realism, right? But they're average, common day, everyday objects. He tears down the barriers between the art and artist as well as the viewer and the art. The objects become what they represent, nothing more. He further chooses ordinary objects to question our expectations of high art. And this is one of the first works that he does. He does what's called the store. And so he makes it look like you're in a cafeteria and you go in and you grab your pie or your rack of lamb or your apple and then you eat it. So the idea is to try to make it feel like it's the real world. However, it's kind of not. It's kind of that weird, uncanny valley in between where it looks kind of real, but then it kind of doesn't. Not surprisingly, he didn't sell any of these. And the question is why, right? What do we expect art to be? Do we expect it to be beautiful? Do we expect it to be kind of real? But this is a little too real in that uncanny valley. This is his pie a la mode. Was it about this that makes it different and makes it not valued? Now, it currently is in LA in the, I think it's in the LA Contemporary Art Museum. So it is, now that he's made a name for himself, it is there and it's on display and you can interact with it. But then he starts doing something totally different. He says, okay, that's too real. Let's make it a little less real. Let's make things really large. And so here's his floor cake. He kind of takes the cake and blows it up so that we can have new meaning, new interaction with it. But again, the temptation is to say, okay, Oldenburg, what's this mean? And he says, it's a floor hamburger. It's a piece of cake. No, but what's it mean? What commentary is it? Is it on, eating healthy? Is it? And he's like, it's just the world around us. It's just reflecting the world around us. And then when the museum bought this in Canada, there were some students that wanted to do a bit of a protest. And so what they did is they sneaked a large cardboard bottle of ketchup in and put it next to it. And so that was their commentary on modern art. But then he does a lot of public art, public installations. There's probably some cities that you guys live near that probably has an Oldenburg. This is the clothespin in Philadelphia. This one is a shuttlecock in Kansas City. Just common everyday things that we value. What is it about the world that we value? What is it that we like, right? And so he just represents this, or cheery spoon bridge and cherry, right? So this idea of just common everyday objects that are meant to be fun. Can art just be fun? But showing common objects, but in a new meaning, a new context, but without commentary.
Living in the 60s and the works that came out of the 60s, which look the way they do because I reacted to certain different places and times during the 60s. In the beginning, we were just going to look back at the 60s through the Maas Museum, and then it developed into examples of the artwork of the 60s and so on. And so the Maas Museum is still a part of the exhibition, and is a very important part of it. But then you have real works from that time to supplement the works in the Maas Museum. So it's a kind of a complex idea.
But again, the question is, what makes something art? Right? Can something ordinary be art? Something everyday be art? Right? And so again, we think of art as kind of this high art, highbrow art, but can, a hamburger or fries be art? Right? Or a sink? Getting us to think about that without really commentary. Let's take a look at one of his contemporaries, Jasper Johns. Influenced by his neighbor, Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns also focused on the literalness of objects. Targets that we'll take a look at are literally targets. At the same time, they're not targets, but works of art. He inserts himself in the text, and he closes the gap between the artist and the works of art by focusing on the function of art. Art should represent its functionality to him. A target should be a target. A bottle should be a bottle. Johns reveals that a work of art is nothing more than an object. By doing so, he closes the gap between the real and the represented object. They're virtually the same, right? So as we take a look at this, right, this is a target. So he suggests that, okay, we need to get back to reality. We need to get back to realism. So let's represent a target. But what should a target look like? It should literally look like a target. But again, it's not a target because you're not going to use this for target practice. It's a work of art. So the question is, what makes something a work of art and what makes something not a work of art, right? The idea of functionality. And here he's questioning the idea of what our expectations of art really
are.
In
1958, a young artist made a dramatic entrance onto the New York art scene with work that seemed to make a clean break with the dominant art of the day. Unlike the abstract expressionists, Jasper Johns didn't reject representation. He gave us signs and symbols, things the mind already knows, as he put it. And most symbolic and familiar of all was the American flag. Against the backdrop of the Cold War, was this a political statement? Is it subversive or celebratory? Or has any such meaning simply dissolved in the thick layers of geometrically abstract paint? In his long career, Johns has left his mark on everything from pop art to minimalism, conceptual art to performance. Still working today, his nuanced, complex art is layered with multiple meanings. Johns wants us to look and to think. And in that act of looking, he believes, as his friend and mentor Marcel Duchamp did, that we complete the work of art ourselves.
That idea of we complete the work of art is a big part of this post-war art, that we're part of it. Our experience is part of it. And you can see how my son, going to it, it's completing the experience for him. He was very upset that we went to the museum that day, me standing next to it. But again, a green target, literally a green target, different from abstract expressionism, which is about what is the insights of the artist, what is he meaning, what's the overall psychological understanding, how does this connect to the larger universal subconscious. They're like, no, let's get rid of all of that and let's just focus on art being art, right? A flag that he's representing, the painting, is literally a flag. But again, it's not really a flag, it's a work of art, right? So he's thinking about that difference, right? What makes it different, okay? Let's take a look at pop art. The main pop art, we're taking a look at early pop art with Rauschenberg and Oldenburg and Jasper Johns. Andy Warhol is more formally part of this pop art movement. No other artist more adequately defines post-war America than Andy Warhol. Warhol was in advertising, but then turned to fine art. He sought to express the frenzy of consumerism. He traced images from magazines on non-absorbent paper and then transferred lines on wet ink, or in wet ink, by pressing them on prepared background. He often would use a projector to enlarge the images with mechanical accuracy, very similar to what we've seen with the other artists. He's trying to remove himself as much as possible. He believed that in our contemporary world, people are surrounded by so many images at once that there are so many sensations that they cancel each other out. Very similar to what we see with Rauschenberg and his assemblages, right? We're surrounded by images. He wanted to capture this. Warhol wanted art to be mechanical, like mass production. After leaving the world of advertising, Warhol's art focused on representing the rise of consumerism, the idea of buying stuff during the 1950s and 60s when people came back from the war. They had a lot of excess cash. And then they wanted to spend, right? The women working in factories, the men were soldiers. Neither one could really buy anything due to restrictions on consumption, due to rations. But then when they get back from the war, they wanted a house, they wanted the washer, dryer, they wanted it all, right? Buying has become humanity's religion in the postmodern world. Entertainers have become our gods. Warhol's art glamorizes the culture of commercialization. To him, art should be superficial, not serious, because we live in a superficial society, right? So something to think about in terms of Andy Warhol is whether he's criticizing or celebrating consumerism, right? And that's something that I'm not really sure about. I like these quotes. He says, making money is art, working is art, good business is the best art. So that idea of consumerism and buying things and business is all linked together. And this one, I think, best summarizes the United States better than anything else. What's great about this country is America started the tradition where the richest consumers buy essentially the same thing as the poorest. You can be watching TV and see Coca-Cola, and you can know that the president drinks Coke too. Liz Taylor drinks Coke, and just think you can drink Coke too. A Coke is a Coke, and no amount of money can get you a better Coke than the one the bum on the corner is drinking. All Cokes are the same, and all Cokes are good, right? Amen. But what he's suggesting with this is what makes America great is that we don't really have this caviar and wine culture. We have this, hot dogs and Coke culture where we're just, there's this level of sameness. Now, some people can buy more, right, due to there's that economic status. But in terms of our consumptive patterns, we all essentially can buy the same thing, right? And so that there's that level of greatness, that level of the American dream, right? As he represents the soup cans, what he does is he wants to represent a work of that reflects our desire to consume. Like we're going into Brolam's or Walmart and we find the onion soup, we put it in our cart, and then we go. This is who we are in the postmodern world, right? This is what we celebrate, right? And I found a lot of people that struggle with Jackson Pollock. I don't really find anyone that struggles with Andy Warhol, right? Everyone loves Andy Warhol, right? Because he's taking images from advertisement. He's taking things that already appeal to us, that we like, and he's reflecting it. Very different from what we see with maybe Klaus Oldenburg, where he's doing things a little bit different, right? Andy Warhol is representing things that we are familiar with, that we love, right? As we see here with Marilyn Monroe, right? They did an exhibit at the Spory Gallery where they brought out all their Marilyns, and put them on display for their pop art, right? But as we think about these, I want you to think about the comparison. Compare these two works of art. Consider what artistic elements you think the works represent. How do you think these works of art represent cultural values? Which one do you think better reflects our values today, right? So as we think about them, right? What is it about them what is it reflecting about our world? What was this reflecting about the Middle Ages? Let's take a look at one more pop artist and what he's seeking to do as he's capturing influence by this changing modern world. Lichtenstein grew up in Manhattan. He initially was an abstract expressionist, but turned to pop art in the 1960s, wanting to capture this culture, this booming culture of buying and excitement and film and all of the glitz and glamour. He used stencils to imitate print with Ben-Day dots. He provides iconic scenes with little reference. He said that he wanted to express violence, emotion, and passion in completely mechanical and removed style. As viewers, we are upset by the violence, but the lack of context questions our emotional connection to it. Lichtenstein asserts in a postmodern age, we feel less and less for each other, and we're becoming more self-centered and desensitized to our world through watching overly violent images, right? So this is an example of what his works looks like. He's influenced by comic books, by this mass print, and so he's represents that as part of high art. And so again, we have the blurring between highbrow art and lowbrow art, or mass culture art, right? And here we see a woman who's drowning. She says, "I don't care, I'd rather sink than call Brad for help." So it's a violent image of someone dying, but we don't really have any context, right? We don't know who she is. We don't know who Brad is. Maybe Brad's is a jerk. Who knows, right? Maybe she's a jerk. Who really knows? But we see the violent image of her dying, which is problematic, but it lacks that kind of context to it. And so he suggests that we're constantly surrounded by violent images in the media that we watch, but we don't really have context to them. And we can become desensitized as a result of that. We're losing that connection to humanity. So he's asking us to think a little bit, more about the world around us. Oh, Jeff, I love you too, but ... And so this is kind of the I love you, the kind of the Dear John letter. I love you too, but I met someone else, or whatever else you fill in there. So he gives us a little context, but the stereotypical element of this makes it feel as though, yes, we understand the overall message. We've watched this film or TV show a number of times. But this here is not physical violence. This is the emotional violence of a breakup, right? So he gives us different context of that violence. And this one, Blam, gives us a similar kind of idea of violence void of context, of a plane being shot down and the pilot ejecting. A violent image, but we don't really have any connection. We don't know if that's, what country the pilot's from. We don't know who's shooting it down, why they're shooting it down. And so are we supposed to feel, this is a victory for shooting the plane down? Is this a tragedy? We don't really know how to feel. And so it provides that kind of, confusion. But again, it gets us to think about how we become desensitized to all of this. And maybe we need to find more humanity in the world around us, right? As we're watching the media around us, as we're watching Avengers or whatever, on, Star Wars or whatever, we tend to be surrounded by constant violence, but a lot of times it doesn't really have any context. When we're seeing someone in the Avengers driving down the street and, running over cars or running other people off the road, we don't think about, those are, they're not really people, but in the overall sense, if that was real, they would be actual people being run off. And so we just get these violent images constantly, and we start thinking less and less about the people and the humanity behind them, and really only thinking about ourselves or the hero or whatever, and that creates a problem. That creates this idea of lacking humanity, and he wants to find that humanity. Again, another thing to think about. There's a couple of comparisons between art that we've studied before and contemporary art. When you compare and contrast the two artists, how do the works represent the differences between high and lowbrow art? What do they call attention to? And then which one do you like better, right? So something to think about. All right, we'll leave off here. And the last lecture for the semester, we'll take a look at minimalism and what minimalism is doing.